Now, the international team investigating the downing of Malaysian flight MH17 over Ukraine in 2014 has released its latest findings. Dutch investigators say it was brought down by a missile fired from a part of eastern Ukraine controlled by Russian-backed separatists.
Ik ga over naar het wapen en ik begin met de conclusie.
I'll start with the conclusion based on the criminal investigation. It may be concluded that flight MH17 was shot down on July 17, 2014 by a 9M38 series missile launched by a Buk trailer. And this Buk trailer was brought in from the territory of the Russian Federation, and after launch was subsequently returned to the Russian Federation.
Well, Simon McGregor-Wood joins us now live from where that press conference was taking place in the Netherlands. Simon, good to see you. It was very, very detailed, the press conference, lots of information in it. Can you just outline exactly what the investigators have concluded?
Yes, of course. And of course, it's important to remember, Paul, that this is a criminal investigation. This is an investigation that will try and uncover evidence that will withstand the possibility of cross-examination in a courtroom eventually. So it is very, very meticulous and very comprehensive. We'd expected that. I think people here are surprised about the level of detail. The revelation A, that it was a Buk missile system that shot down the MH17 flight, was expected to be confirmed. We heard additional detail about the forensic analysis of particles and fragments from such a rocket found at the crash site and in the wreckage itself. And then I think we went on probably the more significant details about the exact location. We'd been promised that we would hear exactly where this missile was fired from, and we got an extraordinary level of detail both on exactly where it was fired from, right down to the scorched earth seen by eyewitnesses and satellite photography, to the area then suspiciously ploughed over in the day after the firing. And then this meticulous tracking, if you like, of the movement of the missile system from within the Russian Federation, Russia, crossing the border into Ukrainian-held territory, moving all the time inexorably closer to this field just outside the village of Permoverskaya in eastern Ukraine, area at the time under control of pro-Russian rebels. And then after the incident itself, again, a similar level of detail, eyewitness accounts, photographs, videos, recorded telephone conversations, tracking it as it moved back across the border. And by the time we get to the 18th of August 2014, the day after the incident, it's back in Russian-held territory. And one of those photos on the way back showed not 4 missiles, but 3, and 1 had been fired. So is the assertion of this joint investigation team.
Simon, in some respects, the information that we've heard today isn't new. It's been out there a long time. I know there are citizen journalists who have come to similar conclusions. But as you say, the difference here is this is trying to bring it together legally to present a watertight case. So what is going to happen next now that this information is out there?
Well, don't forget that also present here, and they got a private briefing before that press conference, Paul, with the families certainly of the Dutch, all 196 victims who are Dutch. They're pushing this investigation forward. They're waiting for justice, of course, and what they've had today is more details on the what and the where, but they're still not any closer really from finding out, at least from the investigation team officially, the who. Who was responsible for sending the missile system in, the chain of command that led to it being fired on the 17th of August 2014. And of course, that's where the joint investigation team needs to turn its attention to. They have said today, given the wealth of recorded telephone conversations, they have identified 100 persons of interest, people who, to a greater or lesser extent, have been involved in this movement of the system in and out of that part of eastern Ukraine on those days in August 2014. Clearly they know who some of those people are, but they're not telling us or the families at the moment. And crucially, if you want to see people in court, it's clear from the joint investigation team, their admission that that part of the process is in a way the more difficult bit. Putting names and faces on potential suspects and then finding them and bringing them to court to face justice, they admit. And I think the families understand that that process is going to take a very long time.
And of course, they'll need help from Russia on that. Simon, thank you very much. Let's go to Moscow now, the Russian capital, and speak to Julia Lyubova, who's got more. Julia, I know that the press conference is still ongoing, but has Moscow made an official response to these findings?
Well, it seems like Moscow is preparing for what steps to take next following this report, as even the state television is keeping quiet about this report and in fact hasn't said anything yet. But Moscow has always disputed claims that it had anything to do with the crash, and even though, of course, with this very strong evidence that we saw following this report that this book system came from Russia and it was fired from the territory controlled by pro-Russian rebels. But so it'll be difficult for Moscow to deny that it had anything to do with this crash. However, the Kremlin has already done so. We heard earlier on Wednesday from the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, who said that the Russian Defense Ministry has already spoken out about this new radar data. And in fact, on Monday, the Defense Ministry held a press conference in what appeared to be a specifically timed effort to discredit this report that's come out today. The Defense Ministry said that the rebels, pro-Russian rebels, are not to blame. It said that it has some newly discovered data which shows that no signs that a missile was fired from the territory controlled by the rebels, and in fact it was fired from the territory controlled by Ukraine. So again, more denial and more defense from the Russian side.
What do you think the political fallout is going to be from this, Julia? Do you think Moscow is expecting further sanctions from the West?
That certainly could come along. Of course, when that crash happened, the EU and the US have slapped some sanctions against Russia, and that led to a fallout between Russia and the West. So certainly this could lead to another political fallout, because Russia maintains that it has nothing to do with it. And of course, now we have this strong evidence. And there have been efforts by several states to set up an international tribunal, but Moscow had blocked, in fact, those efforts. In July 2015, Moscow used its veto the UN Security Council to block a draft resolution for such international tribunal. So Moscow is likely to continue to deny that it had anything to do with this crash. So we'll have to wait and see exactly where this all leads.
Okay, Julia, thank you very much. Of course, 298 people were killed on the day of that crash on board the plane, and a number of them were Australian. Let's go to the Australian capital now and join our correspondent, Karen Middleton. Karen, do you think today is going to be any form of closure for the families of the victims?
Probably not yet closure, but I think vindication certainly for the Australian families and for the Australian government. The Australian government has said from the beginning that they've held Russia responsible for this incident. And in fact, the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, spoke about it in very strong terms shortly after it happened, and indeed did ultimately confront Vladimir Putin at the APEC meeting in Beijing late in 2014 after these events. Indeed, there was a suggestion for a little while that maybe President Putin would not be invited to the G20 meeting that was then held in Australia in Brisbane a few weeks after that. But indeed, he did attend. There was some tension, and the Australian government, as I say, has always blamed Russia. Russia has always denied it, as we've heard, but the government here, which hasn't formally responded yet, will see this as vindication and is determined to push ahead for some kind of justice for these families.
When you talk about some kind of justice, what do we expect to happen next? Are the families going to use these findings to pursue a court case, legal cases against the list of the 100 names that's been mentioned today?
I think different families have a different view about what justice looks like. Certainly, I'm sure all of the families of the 38 Australian citizens and residents who were killed in that incident will be wanting to know who was ultimately responsible and to see that they can be brought to justice. The son of one couple who were killed today said justice for him would be the end of the conflict in Ukraine. I think others want individuals held responsible. We've already heard that the Russian Federation is seeking to veto any UN investigation or UN war crimes tribunal relating to this, but I think there will be exploration of what other options there might be to bring people to justice once the names are indeed known. And we're already hearing from the Australian investigators involved in this investigation in the Netherlands that they will stay in place until early 2018, determined to try and see this thing through.
Okay, Karen, thank you very much.